The sun has left and forgotten me. It's dark, I cannot see.
Your stories don't define you, but how you tell them will. Hi, I'm Sarah Elkins, your host and chief story maker at Elkins Consulting. Whether you're sharing business stories or personal stories, remember that how you share them and which stories you share matter. It makes a difference in how you're perceived by the people around you. And it also makes a huge difference in your internal dialogue, those internal messages that shape your identity. And when you think about those experiences that you had, whether it was growing up or even as recently as a year ago or 5 days ago, you can see that the way you share that story can change the way you experienced it and the lessons that you learn well into the future as a result of that experience. And my guest today is a perfect example of that kind of story, those experiences that shape who we are in positive ways because of the lessons we learn from them. So I'd love to welcome my friend Demetrius onto the Your Stories Don't Define You, How You Tell Them Will podcast. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you so much for hosting, Sarah.
Well, for our listeners, we met because you are a partner owner of a theater called the Covalite Theater in Butte, Montana. And one of our friends performed there, a woman that plays with our band, Marley Kendrick, and she plays with Marley in the Pocket, which listeners, you need to look that up. We'll include a link on the show notes here. But Marley and her fiance, Dave, who's the drummer in our band, play in Marley in the Pocket as well. And after their experience at the Covalite, they came back to our band, Rocket to Uranus, and said, we have to play at the Covalite. You are going to love it. It's such an interesting place. And the next day, I saw a whole article about the renovation and restoration of this facility and a little bit of your story behind it. So I could not wait to get you on this podcast. I'm so glad you agreed to it and you scheduled time. So, oh my gosh, we're going to have so much fun in the next few minutes.
I look forward to it. I don't consider myself a great storyteller because, my best model for storytelling is my dad, who tends to give way too many granular details that are unnecessary. So, feel free to cut me off if I start going into the weeds too much.
Oh, absolutely. And it's so funny because I just did a whole bunch of workshops with engineers and I asked what is one of the problems
Talk
they
about
have with telling
details.
stories. And it's either too many details or it's not enough detail. And so there are some tips and tricks we can talk about later and maybe even include in this session, in this podcast episode, because I'm sure our listeners will be curious about what kind of coaching I do in that area. So maybe we'll incorporate a little of that in here.
Hey,
But I have a
live coaching.
feeling we won't
Sounds
need too much of that. I've heard some of it. Okay, so as you know, I love to start these episodes by asking my guests to share something about themselves that most people might not know about them. It's not on their bio or on LinkedIn or in a resume. And I love to ask this question because it gives so much dimension to the person that we're talking to. And every time it ends up kind of coming full circle into the conversation about our current present tense in our lives. So, do you have something in your head that you could share with us?
something that people might not know about me. I think lately, as I've made more friends and acquaintances through the Covalite Theater, a whole lot of people are surprised to learn that I don't drink, that I'm a person in long-term recovery. But anybody that's known me for any length of time knows that, because that's a huge part of my story, and how I got to be the person that I am today. So I think if I was going to pick something that most people don't know, it's that I love to be underground. Butte's a great place for people that like to be underground. We have a lot of holes around here. Most of them are not open to the public, but that doesn't stop people like me. When I first moved to Montana, I was woofing on a ranch down in McAllister. And
Okay, wait. What does that mean? Woofing on a ranch?
woofing, WOOF is WWOOF, and it stands for Worldwide Opportunities on Organic Farms. So it's a work
Oh,
exchange program. And yeah, I had been working a cubicle job in Indianapolis with the Indiana Department of Environmental Management and was like, this ain't it.
so
It
discouraging. I
was my
know.
first job out of college and it was maddening. Um,
Hmm.
and so I was looking for a place I could go be a ski bum. And, much to my mother's chagrin, I didn't get a job. Instead, I got room and board for work exchange on a ranch and bought a season pass to Moonlight Basin. And it was a ski bum all winter. And that summer, I worked at Lewis and Clark Caverns. And growing up in Kentucky, anybody that I knew that had any amount of property had some kind of limestone cave on that property. And so I grew up poking in a lot of holes underground and enjoying tight spaces. And so working as an interpretive guide at Lewis and Clark Caverns was my first real job in Montana. And through that, I got introduced to this secret society that's the Northern Rocky Mountain Caving Grotto. Um, since then, there have been some younger people that have come into the leadership of that organization, and it's not so cryptic anymore. But it was like there was no information anywhere. It was just like hearsay from somebody that came to visit the caverns that was on a tour with me. And yeah, so I joined the caving grotto and got into the caving community and learned that Montana's got like over 300 caves all around the state. And most of them are vertical entry. And so it's repelling to get into them and using ascenders to climb the rope coming back out. And I'd never done caving like that because in Kentucky, it's all horizontal. We don't have huge mountains and all of this like up thrust in the layers of rock. And so I think that love of being underground in the dark in tight spaces. That's something that a lot of people don't know about me, and I don't know something about those experiences. Like I feel like a 6-year-old when I'm underground, and I act like it too, right? Like
Right, right.
the childlike energy comes out. Um, yeah, and it's something I really enjoy and have found some great community in too.
Excellent. Oh my gosh. That just set off a whole bunch of questions in my head. But I'm going to start with this. You are a 6-year-old, you're in Kentucky, and you're in one of those caves. And this will likely, because this is how our memory works, this will likely be kind of a combination of memories from the first probably 3 years of your experiences at 6, 7, 8, 9 years old. You're in one of these caves. What's something that you're seeing right now that is just blowing your mind?
First is darkness. Um, at a young age, I didn't have the wherewithal to pack a flashlight, and so going back into the unknown is the initial luster of a hole in the ground. It's like, ooh, has anyone been back here? Is there anything in here worth seeing? Um, and I remember
So
as a
mystery.
yeah, it's mystery. It's exploration. It's high adventure. Um, and then I remember some of the earliest cave experiences I had were in show caves in Kentucky, like Mammoth Cave, is gigantic, expansive rooms, which, it takes going from these small holes on my uncle's farm into acres of open space with 50-foot tall ceilings, um, and realizing, oh my gosh, there's a lot down here. There's so much more beneath the surface than what I imagined when I first stuck my head into some dark hole and was like, I wonder if that goes anywhere. Um,
Right.
Yeah.
I'm imagining, I remember feeling that way the first time I put on goggles or a snorkeling mask in the ocean
Yeah,
and being like,
absolutely.
oh, I
Oh, there's
had
a
no
whole
idea
world here.
all this stuff. Yeah. And I bet most of our listeners can relate to some aspect of that. Like my niece, she's been growing up in the Berkeley area of California, Albany, California. And when she was maybe 5 or 6, my sister, for the first time, took her out to a cabin near Stinson Beach in Northern California, just the two of them. And she remembers being outside and her daughter saying, "What's that?" looking up at the sky and seeing the stars. She literally didn't know what that was because she lives in a city and she never experienced stars to that scale. And my sister called me the next day. She's like, "We need to come to Montana.
Yes.
We're coming next
Come see
summer.
the
We're
Milky
coming to
Way.
Montana." Yeah. And it's that same sense of wonder. Oh my gosh. I'm imagining you as a 6-year-old Demetrius and grinning. Like I'm grinning, thinking about, and I think part of that is that I've been really interested in the study of awe as an emotion because it's so different from other emotions. It can be awe in a good way, awe in a bad way. Um, and one of the things that I've been incorporating in all of my workshops is asking people for an experience of awe, and not just that 6-year-old awe, but the awe of experiencing their own bravery or the awe of just seeing your first wildflower of the season. There's so many little things that can draw that same emotion. It doesn't have to be epic. But one of the things that has come up multiple times in my workshops is when somebody experiences awe simply by experiencing the awe of someone else, in particular a
Mhm.
child.
Children make that so much more accessible. I that's a that is a really interesting point because as I've gotten older and gotten more into extreme sports and the caving turned into more of a sporty adventure on rope and doing
Riskier. Every
it's
time it gets
risky, right?
riskier.
Yeah. I am totally
Yeah.
as
An adrenaline junkie.
I am definitely an adrenaline junkie and someone that is not risk averse. But the the requirements for me to slip into awe seem to escalate, right? And
Mhm.
but then you're right when you see the genuine experience that a child is having, you can't help but feel that energy.
Right. Well,
Um,
and now wait a minute. This is kind of leading back into this recovering addiction, right?
mhm.
Because my understanding of that is that it's a continual search for that next slightly bigger high. Oh, the next one's going to be bigger. The next one's going to be bigger. And so it sounds like you're saying that it's kind of transferred into your adventure life, that instead of finding it in addiction of a
Substance.
product, right? You're shifting that into an addiction of adrenaline through adventure. So I would like to know, as we're talking about this, I'm sure a lot of our listeners have either experienced this or have experienced it in somebody that they love, somebody they care about.
Mhm.
So when you think about this transition into being a business owner, going particularly the Covalite, we could talk a little bit about the other aspect of what you do, but the Covalite is especially dear to me because it's a historic building in Butte. It's being renovated, remodeled, used for the benefit of the community in such significant ways. And I would like to know, as we're transitioning from the awe of the underground and the awe of adrenaline and the ropes and all the gear it takes to keep experiencing more and more of that. What was an experience after you and your partner bought the Covalite and something happened inside it that promoted that same sense of, oh my gosh, this is important, or wow, this is a thing. You're already smiling because you already know it's in your head.
there are like flashes of different memories that I've had.
Yes.
It's,
Let's share a couple of them.
I mean, it started with, um, my first experience of awe with the Cobalite Theater was before I purchased it. Like it was in talking with two owners ago, Matt Fry, who had talked me out of it initially, taught me out of buying the Cobalite. Um, I was starting to put some plans together and talking about what it had looked like financially when he had owned it, and the current or the previous owner who was living out of state. When he put it on the market, I started investigating. Okay, what's the likelihood that I could help to make this a successful business, and a self-supporting endeavor. And then I was so grateful when someone else put in an offer and they accepted it and it was moving towards closing. And I was like, thank goodness, I don't have to worry about this. I don't have to think about it. I have plenty on my plate right now. Like I don't need
One more thing.
This is a sign. Like I don't need to worry. I don't need to plan about this anymore. And the day after that deal to purchase the Cobalite fell through, I got the first call that was like, "Hey, it's back on the market. Are you still interested in this? I would love to help you." And then the next day, someone else called and said, there's a lot of people that want to support this and like would be in it with you if you want to make it happen. And then the next day, a third person called, and like so anytime I get that like three confirmations for something, I feel very directed. It feels like an intuitive thing of, all right, don't know what's going to happen, but I know where I need to go. I know that I need to show up for this.
Going underground.
And that, yeah, exactly. It's a descent into the unknown. And so, there was just this sense of faith that it was going to, like, I didn't have to bear this myself, right? Mm-hmm. Like I was here to facilitate something. And, so that was my first experience of awe with the Cobalite Theater. So it's hard to pick one show that did it for me, but
well, think about the audience.
I know so it's kind of, I would say the 710 Ashbury show that we had.
I love those guys. They're from Helena, listeners. We'll put a link in there. 710 Ashbury is obviously a Dead tribute band, and they're dear friends of ours here in Helena. I played with John Chart before, the guitar player. But anyway, okay, so 710 Ashbury, it's full of love. It's a total Ashbury, dead fan tribute, right?
And we had just had this new sound system installed, new lights. The crowd was electric, and the watching, like I came into that show. That was the one of the first shows that I didn't run myself. I didn't open up the venue. I had other commitments that day and had a friend that was opening up the venue and helping to facilitate the show. And so I came in later in the evening to a full house upstairs in the sanctuary of this, almost 130-year-old Gothic cathedral, to beautifully painted lights around the room, and the vibe that the Dead brings of community and love, and people are swirling with the music. And I just sat down in like the third row back and was just overcome with, this is like, I am a small part of this whole. And like, I get to be a part of this. That was the feeling that I had, was like, I get to be a part of this. And what a beautiful moment it was, because it was, this realization that, I don't know, it was, there are a lot of times that, the feeling of responsibility or need for control, like, engages my ego, and I get very mentally involved in it, and it takes me out of that present moment. But that was a moment that I was, fully present, and realizing that, like, this is something that is special, that's sacred, that I can be a part of sharing with a community and building community through this venue. And it doesn't have to be through this like forced effort of my own.
Right.
These things can happen and unfold naturally with putting faith and trust in the team and in the community that makes it possible. And it was amazing. That was
so there's I have to interrupt you because there's so many, the swirl, you know how that goes. And we talked about this when we first met about the swirl of ideas that just won't shut up. I have chills. The hairs on the back of my neck went up at least 3 times during this story. And the first thing that popped into my head was one of the phrases in the book Awe that I read, and I can't remember the whole title, but my friend Jeff Eichler and my friend Rich Gasson both said, you need to read this book. And we'll put a link in the show notes on the podcast episode at elkinsconsulting.com. But there's one type of awe that he describes as collective effervescence. And that's exactly what you described, this collective effervescence, where you feel like a tiny part of a very big picture. And you recognize that even though you're this tiny part, you belong there. You're part of it, part of something bigger and beautiful. And collective effervescence. So that I had to share that. I had to interrupt before I forget. I've been jotting down notes too. The other aspect of that I love is that when you talked about being able to let go of that forcing into something, the control thing. And you've done that a couple times in these stories. One was when the 3 calls came in.
Mm-hmm.
That is, in effect, I won't call it surrendering because that sounds so passive. My dear friend Erin McLean calls it allowing.
Right.
Which I love because it feels like you are welcoming whatever is coming to you, even if you have to shift your position or do some research to make sure that you're in the right place for that welcoming. And she's dealing with significant health issues. And so the allowing doesn't mean I'm surrendering to my health issues. The allowing is, okay, what's coming next? How am I managing whatever's coming toward me? Because I can't fight this, but what I can do is allow it, recognize it, and do what I can to be in the right frame of mind for whatever the universe is putting in my lap. And that's what you did with your 3 calls, gently nudging you. I call them gentle nudges of the universe, gently nudging you toward what you were meant to do. And then sitting there, understanding that you had created a community. Now, granted, you became part of a community because when you live in Butte, Montana, you either become part of the community or you leave, because it's an amazingly welcoming, warm, and I'm missing a word here, accepting community of people. And there's definitely passions that take people in opposite directions and cause friction. But in general, Butte shows up for Butte, even if you're new to Butte. So you joined a community, but what you did with the Covalite after receiving those 3 calls was you also built a community within that. And being able to allow for that rather than having that tight control gave you the opportunity for that collective effervescence awe.
Yeah,
So,
I think control is is a function of fear.
yeah,
It's really
always.
like we're not in control of very much, right? Like I can't even control my first thought, but it's the
Right.
second thought, it's the actions that follow. That's the only things that I really have um, control over. Now, I can have influence in a lot of ways, but as far as having control, it's really just what goes on in my body and in my mind that I have true control over. And so those calls to me dispelled the fear and the anxiety over this big endeavor, and opened the door to allowing. And that's
Yes.
to get out of yourself and into the present moment where you can allow and receive. And
And participate, contribute.
I haven't listened to her in a long time, but I'm reminded of Abraham Hicks. I don't know if you have a familiarity with.
No.
This is an interesting. I don't want to like delve super far into that, but it is a channeled being that has been delivering a message in motivational and like self-help in the motivational speaking and self-help arena for a number of years. And she shares a lot about or they share a lot about allowing, about being accepting the blessings that the universe has to bestow. And what I realize is like if I limit myself with what I think I can do, I guess confining my ambitions to what I think I can do is limiting myself.
Absolutely.
Uh,
Yeah. Have
that
you
there's
found, I
Go
have to
ahead.
ask you this, have you found that oftentimes when you do that to yourself, other people open the door for you? Because that's
Yeah,
been my experience where I'm like, well, I don't know if I can. And other people are like, what? You don't even know that you can do this? Or, they put it in my lap and say, I know you can do this.
that was my
Yeah.
like the big nudge that I got when I was 22. No, I was 21 at the time. I was after working at Lewis and Clark Caverns. I was then living in Ennis, and when I was in college, I'd gotten interested in um, the local food movement, and
Mhm.
that I joined Slow Food in Indianapolis and learned about Food Corps, which was a new AmeriCorps program that does nutrition education and school gardening. Um, and somebody was like, "Oh, you should join that," and I was like, "Man, AmeriCorps is for people that can't get jobs. Like, I don't want to do."
Which
But
listeners, look up AmeriCorps. There are all kinds of amazing opportunities. So that was his impression at first, but just so you know, AmeriCorps and all their service organizations are outstanding opportunities. So
the two
I just had to
years, I
interrupt.
I ended up in Food Corps' annual report based on a quote that I said to their director that was, "My 2 years of service did more for me than graduate school ever could have," because it's really experiential education. And like what I was entrusted with in that time and the opportunities that I learned that I could create for other people um, was invaluable to empowering me be to create change. So when I was in, I was working at Lewis and Clark Caverns and wondering what am I going to do next, and realized that there's a food corps service site in Ennis, Montana, of all places, like a
Wow,
town
I
of
didn't know
1,000.
that.
I had somehow landed in a place where food corps already existed. And so I was like, well, what the heck? I'll put in an application. And I got the position to work with the Madison Farm to Fork in the Ennis School District. And we were at a winter training / retreat in the winter of 2012 to 2013. 2013 to 2014, actually. And I was sitting in a hot tub with somebody that worked at NCAT here in Butte, the National Center for Appropriate Technology. And they're primarily focused on renewable energy and sustainable agriculture work. And that was the host organization for Food Corps in the state of Montana. And I was talking with one of their program staff that ran an initiative called the Growing Leaders Youth Initiative. And I was like, how cool would it be to have a program for high schoolers that introduced them to the variety of work opportunities that exist within the local food systems? And here's my experience and the things that I have learned. And I would love for high schoolers to know that this is an option. We're in an agricultural state. There are programs like FFA that help steer young people into the agricultural field, but those programs
Future Farmers of America.
Future
and 4-H as well. Mm-hmm.
And for the most part, those programs are looking at the conventional farming methods and conventional large-scale production, processing, and distribution of food. So I'm like, well, what could we have that would introduce young people to a local food system? And started brainstorming this with Jeremy Drake, who was working at NCAT at the time. And Jeremy said, if you want to build a program, I bet I could find funding for it. And I was like, this is one example of somebody else opening the door for me. I was just like,
right. You mean I'm going to have to put my money where my mouth is? Is that what you're telling me? Now I have to do something about my idea?
I don't have plans for this, a summer program during my food corps service this year, and why not build one? And so working with Jeremy, we put together a summer program for high schoolers in Ennis that had them working with Farm to Fork to plant, harvest, and take food to market at the Ennis Farmers Market. They were also selling wholesale food from that same garden to one of the local restaurants. And they worked with the restaurateur to learn about how she sets menus, pricing, and prepares foods. And then we went, even bigger to the Mission Mountain Food Enterprise Center, which aggregates and processes Montana grown foods to help meet institutional demands. If somebody wants crushed tomatoes, they'll take the local tomatoes, make a crushed product, and then sell it to an institution. And then we looked at the Western Montana Growers Cooperative, which distributes Montana grown food. And so it was this, whole picture of Montana's local food system for these young people. And in the middle of that, smack in the middle of this summer program, my mother passed away of cancer.
Oh.
And so I left Montana. I went back to Kentucky where I grew up to be with my family. And when I came back 2 weeks later, everything was still going. Like the kids were still engaged. Nothing had stopped. And like this thing that I had front loaded a bunch of energy into, as a 23-year-old, had taken on its own life. And that was like the first experience that I had ever had of organizing something that could exist without me. And it was in the middle of the biggest tragedy of my life. It was a feeling of being held by the universe, being supported, and knowing that there's a capacity for creativity and inspiration that's accessible to anybody. And so, in discovering that in myself, I in turn, I I was talking to a friend at a recovery conference this past summer, and he was like, "Well, Demetrius, I made a mistake, and I've identified myself as a person of some capacity, and now I have way too much to do." And I was like,
I hear you.
"Well, Gail, what your responsibility is now is to help other people discover that they have that same capacity." He was like,
Yeah.
"All right, yeah, I can get on board with that." Because, I only get to keep what I have by giving it away. Or else I get so bound up in the responsibilities and this feeling of, carrying a responsibility that, I myself become overwhelmed. But if I can turn outwards, if I can share that with other people, it seems like that capacity just grows.
Yeah. No kidding. Boy, if only you could train a whole bunch of organizations like within public sector agencies to be able to understand that your job, once you've created something, is to build and develop other people to help sustain it, to maintain it, and to grow it. And I love so much of that story. My eyes teared up, of course, when you mentioned feeling held by the universe after your mother's death. And I think so many of us are always looking for the times that we were wronged or the times that the universe seemed to punish us, that we forget to look for those moments of grace when the universe just opened its arms and held us. And I love that story for so many reasons. I know we need to kind of wrap up. I don't want to go take up too much more of your time, but I have to ask you, all of this beauty of your early 20s, what led you to deciding to stop drinking? Like, what was that transformation? Because, what I'm hearing is this personal growth, and maybe I'm kind of answering my own question, maybe too much responsibility, maybe taking yourself too seriously because of your early success.
Taking
Uh-oh.
myself too seriously, that's never been a problem. That's something that I still wrestle with. I remember when I was in college having a friend that was like, "Doesn't seem like you laugh a whole lot, Demetrius. Are you okay?" And that was because my idea of a good time was being completely inebriated. And I tried to stay there for as much of my waking hours as possible because I didn't have skills to cope with my own emotions or even identify how I was feeling at any given point in time. And so numbing it out was the thing. I had a 6-month bout with depression when I was 20 years old. And that was the first time I think I was sober for 4 months during that because I felt like there was some realization I needed to have. But it was utter misery. And, I dove when school got back in session that fall, I dove really deeply into studies and started tutoring other people in my class and really just focusing on intellectual gains, but I still didn't have any kind of spiritual life. And what ended up kind of bringing me out of that just deeply intellectual shell was heroin. And I spent the next 4 years chasing an opioid high. And it was when my mother died and I was we got home from the hospital and I was trying to depersonalize my mom and dad's bedroom. Like it looked like she had just walked out. And, I knew it was super hard on my dad. And I told him when we were coming back from the hospital, I was like, man, I'm probably going to get high this week. And all he could say to me was, I really need you here. So I'm putting stuff away in their bedroom, in their bathroom, to hopefully, dull the sense that my mother was just there 2 weeks prior. And I found a bunch of her pain medications. And I was like, I'm gonna save these for later. And turns out my dad had been having he had a pinched nerve in his shoulder, and he had actually been taking her medications to help him sleep, to deal with pain so that he could sleep. And so like 3 days later, he confronted me and was like, do you know what happened to these medicines? And I was like, yeah, I have a drug problem. And he was like, well, give me the rest of them. And I said, there are no more. And he was like, there was a lot there. And I was like, yeah, I have a drug problem. Like I have a huge tolerance to these things because I've been doing this for years. And so that, at the end of 2014 was like when it came to my family's attention and I started to have some accountability. And, everything that I did from that point for the next 9 months was really just to appease them. And, I thought I could learn enough to outsmart addiction, right? Like I thought I could become a responsible opioid user. And after 9 months of trying and failing, and I had a counselor that framed it for me in a really elegant way. And she was like, Demetrius, you've spent one night in jail. You've lost one job. Like you may be able to maintain this kind of minimal up and down in your life while using drugs, or abusing drugs. But think about how much more you're going to have to lose the older you get, when you have a home, you have a family. Like what do you have to lose by stopping now? By taking the time to go to a rehab program, learn about this part of yourself, and start practicing a new way of life. And, after attempting for 9 months to stop and realizing that I didn't have the tools by myself to do that, I went into treatment on Cinco de Mayo in 2015. That was the last time that I had a drink, was the day before. And, I learned a lot. I thought I was going in to exercise a demon. And then like partway through treatment, I was like, oh my gosh, I am the demon. Like, how am I going to, it's my responsibility to change. Nobody's going to do this. Nobody's going to make different choices for me. And I struggled for 4 years after that, having relapses, periods of sobriety, relapses on drugs, periods of sobriety. And actually just this past month on the 24th, I celebrated 5 years of sobriety. And I haven't, it's interesting, right? Like my last relapse was while we were forming the Butte Spirit Homes organization that I currently am the executive director of, which provides sober living homes for both men and women here in Butte. And I tried to make recovery so much more complicated than it is. Trust trusting in the universe, trusting in a higher power, taking the time to look inside myself and see what my patterns are, what those habits are, and then using that awareness to do some manual rewiring in my head, right?
Mm-hmm.
Change my reactions, change my responses, adopt better behaviors. And it takes a concerted effort over and over to make different choices. And that's a lifelong process now. At one point I thought, well, I'm just going to recover and then I can go back to some way of life. And now it's like, oh no, growth is never ending.
Right. This is a way of life.
This is a way of life. And it's exciting because that the spiritual aspect of it for me means that I might not know what's best for me, but I can trust that there is some force that is guiding the process that I can have a measure of faith in, and trust in other people to be reflections of that divinity. And, know that if I'm open and authentic in myself, things are going to turn out better than I can imagine. It's not just about achieving my dreams. It's like, how can I participate in this collective? And, change my life. Like without a shitty road down drugs and alcohol, I don't think I would have come back to a spiritual way of life. And, it's been the most transformative experience for me personally. And, that's like, I'm not, I am not afraid of relapse today. It's not like I'm fighting a temptation to use mood and mind altering substances. It's more like motivated towards growth and a growth mindset. And, so it's, instead of thinking about, well, I want to stop doing this today, it's, I want to continue growing today, and realizing that like drugs and alcohol were a roadblock to that growth. And so like, what do I need them for? It's not, doesn't have to be a part of my life today.
It's a reframe. It's thinking about the potential, rather the potential for good versus the fight for against. Potential for good versus fight against something. And the momentum is always going to be easier to gain when you're thinking about potential for good.
Absolutely.
I love that.
I didn't have I guess that turning point for me was misery. It was utter misery.
Right.
I hated who I was. I was stealing from people. I had stolen from 20 some odd people, right? Like my deceased mother was just one of a multitude of people that I had stolen from. And I remember, when I was in high school and using drugs with this older group of friends that I had been adopted into, and seeing some of them that were far off the beam and engaged in thievery and dishonesty and like all of these things that like morally didn't sit well with me. And then I became that. And I was so disgusted with who I was. And that's for anyone listening that has a family member or a personal struggle with drugs and alcohol, like it takes pain. Pain is the best motivator for change. And sometimes the best thing that you can do for somebody that you love is let them experience that pain.
Yeah.
Because it's the more I got away with my bad behavior, the more I just persisted in it.
Right.
And I was lucky that I had people that helped turn my attention towards a better way of life. But for some people, it's the Department of Corrections. that does that.
Right. Right. Yeah.
And, I'm just glad that my whole criminal record's been expunged at this point. I might have like a traffic ticket on there, but I was lucky in that I didn't have to go so far down that road. And that's the thing, the bottom is just where you
Right.
stop digging.
Yeah. What's interesting about this is I just recently, well, so much interesting about this, but one of the conversations I recently had with a podcast guest, Hope Marshall, just this amazing woman, lives on the East Coast and does trainings. Right now, she's working as a contractor and does these amazing leadership trainings for people at the Department of Homeland Security and the DoD. And she said that she took this 15-year detour off her career that she has some regrets about. And the conclusion we came to was that you have to go through this to be who you are now. You can't skip that part and find yourself. You can't skip that part and choose your identity. You have to experience those transitions and transformations and pain and grief and joy to embrace the identity that you are building. And your identity changes over time, who you are, what you think, what you believe. If you give yourself those opportunities to move away from home, to try things that you wouldn't normally have tried, then every time you do that, you're taking yourself in a better position to decide who you are rather than resigning to the identity that was thrust upon you or that you built within the confines of somebody else's environment, somebody else's community. And I love that you explored all this and came to where you are now. I mean, I love that you're in Butte because I know you're just an hour away from me and we can hang out. And I love what you're contributing to that community. And even more importantly, I love this journey that you're exploring and that you continue to explore. It's just, there's so many moments through this conversation where I've had the hairs on the back of my neck go up or my eyes filled with tears because even without being somebody who's recovering from addiction, there's so many aspects of your story that I can relate to.
Mm-hmm.
Going through the dark parts of life, right?
What you were just sharing, it's like we're all working some program, whether it's consciously or unconsciously. Mm-hmm. And if it's just fed by your environment, a lot of times it's not a great program.
Right. It may not fit you. And it's hard to get away from it. It's scary.
To build an awareness around it and choose a lifestyle or choose a path that you consciously adopt is I think it's an important part of life. Just given this American way, I think it's better if you choose your own instead of taking everything that media throws and saying this is who I am.
Right.
Everything that marketing throws at us.
And creating the community that you feel like you can contribute to. I talk a lot about belonging and with friends of mine, like my friend Paul Howry and Brooke Errol. Like I have these amazing people that that is their primary work, is encouraging and building systems within organizations to improve belonging at work. So I talk a lot about that. I hear a lot about that. And the conclusion I continue to come to is that if you want to build community, then people have to feel like they can contribute. Mm-hmm. You cannot be part of a community, truly be part of a community, if you don't feel like you can contribute your greatest self to it. And that's what I've experienced in you and in quite a few people in Butte, Montana, and here in Helena. And that's why I wanted to chat with you. So this was such a great conversation.
I'm so grateful to be a part of it and for the contributions that you give to helping people learn to express their stories and hone their stories, because that's where impact comes from. I mean, these are things that have ripple effects that I can't begin to comprehend or plan, right? I have no
Right.
idea what's going to happen.
It's the mystery. We're back going underground. We're in the cave again.
Yeah.
All right. Well, what I would like to come full circle. And first of all, I want to take a screenshot of us so that we can include it in the show notes in the podcast. So get ready with a big smile. You ready?
Hold on, let me straighten my mustache for this. I slept funny last night.
Listeners, you're going to love the mustache. Okay, here we go. Big grins. Demetrius, thank you so much for joining me on Your Stories Don't Define You, How You Tell Them Will. It was really thoughtful and inspiring and sometimes humorous conversation. So thank you.
Thank you for having me, Sarah. Look forward to seeing you in Butte in June.
Yeah, July. I think it's July 6th is when we're playing in Butte at the original.
Right. July 6th is our Butte Pride.
Yep, can't wait. So, listeners, it's your turn. The first thing that maybe would be helpful to you is to find the activity, the thing that brings out your inner 6-year-old. Think about what it was that at 6 years old or 8 years old made you question everything, that made you stop and get super curious about what was going to come next. What was that thing? Was it going into a cave? That was not it for me. Was it hearing somebody perform on an instrument or singing? Was it riding your bike for the first time? What was it that brought you to that inner 6-year-old? And what can you bring back into your life to experience that wonder and awe, whether it's in watching somebody else experience it or finding it in small details yourself? And then next, what are you contributing to your communities of choice? Think about how you participate, because when you are part of a community and you contribute like that, that's when really good things happen. And whether your community is in person or online, that contribution of building something, of helping develop other people to sustain positive momentum, that's what you're looking for. Thanks for listening to Your Stories Don't Define You, How You Tell Them Will.
Smile, what's the use of crying? You'll find that life is still worthwhile if you just smile.